JJ, where were you on the rainy night in Paris when literally Manchester City were demolished by PSG?
Well, thankfully I was in the stadium witnessing all of that, but I might well have not been because I had a bit of a nightmare getting myself from Nice, where I'd been staying overnight because I'd been to Villa
Nice.
away at Monaco the day before. So you can imagine the pleasure after walking to the train station in Nice in the pouring rain, freezing cold, being delayed for 3 hours on my train back to Paris, that the first goal that should happen at Parc des Princes when I did arrive as a Villa fan is seeing Jack Grealish put Man City ahead against PSG and then rapidly go 2-0 up. So I was delighted to have made it to the stadium and glad that I did, because even in the 45 minutes to an hour before the game started, you could sense it was a special night for the fans. It was an atmosphere unlike many that we've seen in Paris over the last couple of years, where maybe some of the PSG fan base have become a bit disillusioned. I know that Andy and I have had a couple of meetups at PSG games in the last couple of years, and it's felt a little bit underwhelming in terms of the atmosphere, or that, you know, the fans didn't really believe in the team's chances going into those matches, but they did ahead of this game, which is why it made it all the more surprising that they fell 2 goals behind, because the atmosphere was sensational from the very beginning and it really G'd up the players.
And that came across on the televisual aspects of the match, Andy. Did it make a difference? I mean, that's what JJ was alluding to there. Did that atmosphere, very special atmosphere we could see watching it on the telly, did it make a difference either in the 2-0 beginning of the match or the conclusion?
I think it must have done, Dotun, and it's one of those sort of myths that I always feel I really want to break and sort of kick back against. The idea that Paris Saint-Germain have no history that goes before the QSI era, which is nonsense, because the Parc des Princes built its reputation as a stadium that had great European nights in the 90s. You know, PSG were important to European football culture before this because of that. And to, I guess, get through that era of inviting Jay-Z and DiCaprio and Beckham and all those, and get past Neymar.
You still had Wembanyama there.
Yeah, I mean, that was different. Of course, we've got NBA Paris this week, and you might have seen, I don't know if you saw JJ, Wembanyama doing his keepy-uppies on the touchline. I don't want to go down the whole great touch for a big man route, but he's pretty good for someone who's 7'4" with a football. I think to find, I guess, that sort of soul that they've been looking for since they've got past Mbappe and Messi and Neymar, past the superstars. Of course, they're still very well funded. We know that. And we've talked, JJ, about how maybe in the medium to long term, PSG are better equipped in the Champions League now because they have greater physical power. They can do more off the ball. Now, it's funny because I don't think they've played terribly in this season's Champions League, but they've had a clear problem putting it in the back of the net. And when they go 2-0 down, you think, how has this happened? You know, here we go again, because really they're looking down the barrel of a negative result when they were by far the better team in the first half. Okay, I thought City defended better in that first half, and they fell to bits at the back in the second half. We'll get on to City in a minute. But I really wanted to ask you, is this the moment where we saw the value of that physical intensity and the value of what Luis Enrique is trying to do? Because they go from holding the ball to, when they're 2-0 down, thinking, right, we've got to win the ball higher up the pitch. And it really, really works.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think certainly in terms of this performance, 2 players to really sort of single out for major praise would be João Neves and also Ousmane Dembele. I think both of them were absolutely phenomenal. Delighted for Neves that he managed to get his goal. And, Dembele, he has that ability to turn the game. And it's funny, the way that you're sort of describing it is pretty much exactly what happened against Barcelona in the quarterfinals last season. PSG found themselves trailing after the first leg at home despite playing reasonably well. Went further behind away from home before, obviously, the game changed with Araujo getting red carded. But also, it was almost like the stakes were upped even higher, and that's when PSG really sort of woke up and came to the fore. I would say that there was maybe an element of fear in City's performance. There's a really funny clip, I urge people to go and seek it out on Twitter, of Bernardo Silva basically peering around the corner in the PSG tunnel to verify that it's Dembele who's warming up at half time. So I think it was a bit of a surprise for City as well to then suddenly find themselves in a 2-0 lead, and I don't think that they were able to deal with that. And obviously the desperation or the urgency with which PSG had to play once they went 2 down, you saw the result. I think it was 7 minutes it took for PSG to go from 2-0 down back to 2-2, and I think it was in the space of 15 minutes that the game had gone from 0 goals to 4 goals. So that just says it all about the way that the second half started. But if you look at the way that PSG performed, they could have gone in at the break 1-0 up, Hakimi with a very marginal offside call ruling that goal out just before the break. And maybe if PSG had gone in ahead, the second half would have been completely different. PSG might not have found that urgency and may well have ended up not winning the game, possibly being held to a draw. But I do think that PSG certainly in the last couple of weeks seem to have found or rediscovered that kind of clinical edge that they had last season over the second half of the campaign, which really fired them to that Champions League semi-final appearance. I don't think it's done PSG too many favours in many ways getting that far in the competition, because I just think it's set maybe a bit of an unrealistic bar of expectation in terms of what the team at this moment in time, in terms of its development, is capable of. But obviously when you're adding Kvaratskhelia to the mix, potentially looking ahead to the knockout phase, as long as PSG get the job done in Stuttgart, you would say that PSG, suddenly look a lot meaner and potentially a lot more clinical in front of goal, especially when you've got somebody like Barcola who's, been dozing off since early November and then has suddenly woken up with Kvaratskhelia coming in and picking up goals and assists left, right and centre. So, I think it's something else that's been really underrated as well, and it is kind of linked to PSG not being as efficient in front of goal as they should be, has been the way that Dembele has knuckled down since Luis Enrique didn't take him to Arsenal for the defeat away against the Gunners. I think that could have gone, one of a number of different ways, and it actually came, with the most positive resolution in the end, because Dembele has been really, really impressive, really consistent since then, and has rocketed up the PSG scoring charts and is only 1 or 2 goals behind Barcola now, I think. And that, I think is a really interesting dynamic to watch out for over the second half of the season for PSG, and obviously away at Stuttgart next week as well.
Yeah, Dembele can be such a frustrating player, can't he? Can be so frustrating. He's clearly got skills and everything like that. And I wonder, Andy, whether we or I or all of us underrate his talent. I mean, just before he played perhaps the best move of the match, and feel free to describe that if you want, either of you. Just before he played that best move of the match, I'd literally said to my stepson, give him a break, because my stepson was saying, "Oh, he's rubbish. He's kicking the ball over the bar," and then he plays the best move of the match, which was a nutmeg, but I think it was much more than just your average nutmeg in the penalty area. How good can this guy be?
I guess, to describe the move first, Dotun, as you requested. JJ was talking to me about it to me earlier, and he was calling it an ankle breaker. And I think with Wembanyama and the rest of the San Antonio Spurs in the house last night at the park, that's probably quite appropriate. And we know he's got that ability, and we know he's got the ability to be incisive and to score decisive goals. He was able to do that even with Barcelona, even if his spell overall underwhelmed a little bit. But maybe post Mbappe, he's been appreciated a little more by people outside PSG. who've seen his goals tally go up, for example, this season. But it was never all about that with him. I think he's been really great since he came back to France and since he went to PSG. Because you think of Dembele and you think of his two-footedness, his ability to go around players, his dribbling. People will always ask why he doesn't score more goals. But I think last season he was great in not only he was able to help them stretch the pitch widthways, but in terms of them being able to get up the pitch is absolutely vital. Not just because he can go past players, but he's actually really good at holding the ball up as well, because he's quite tall for a winger. A little bit like David Ginola in that sense, I suppose, another PSG great of the past. So I think a lot of the work that Dembele does goes kind of unnoticed. I do wonder, though, JJ, was there a little bit of rope-a-dope here? Because we'll go on to speak about Manchester City, but I think one of the most noticeable things about City and how they're declining from Champions League contention, look, I still expect them to go through. If they beat Club Brugge in the last game at the Etihad, they go through. It's that simple. I guess it says something about the current fettle of City that we're asking is that as a question rather than a fait accompli. But I just wonder, does this factor into Luis Enrique's thinking? That because it's a bit of a surprise that he starts with Lee instead of Dembele. Is there a sense that, okay, if I bring him on at half-time, they've got 45 minutes in their legs and City can't cope with 90 minutes of us. And if I put him on against City, who've already been given a bit of a going over by us, he can really cash in because, as you say, he and Barker are outstanding in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different elements to consider in that. And, I do think it kind of aided Dembele's ability to be kind of the pantomime villain for Bernardo Silva on the night. But I think as well we have to bear in mind that Dembele had been ill in the weeks building up to the game, so maybe there was an element of risk as well that Luis Enrique didn't want to take from the beginning of the game because he knew that Dembele, if he deployed him at the right moment, could potentially change proceedings, and that's ultimately what happened because it's when Dembele comes onto the pitch. Okay, PSG do concede 2 goals, but ultimately they get on the front foot a lot more easily and ultimately end up hurting City. So I think Luis Enrique's tactical approach to it is absolutely fascinating because I think it's very easy to allow it to fly in under the radar that Luis Enrique has a very good reputation and record against Pep Guardiola sides over the years. And he's one of a very small number of coaches who have had teams that have managed to score 3 or more goals against Guardiola sides more than once. I think Klopp's another one of them, but there's not many of them, and Luis Enrique managed to pull it off again here. And I think to be able to have that number over such a high profile, high caliber manager, does show that Luis Enrique does know what he's doing. I know there's moments where people kind of bring that into doubt a little bit and debate whether he's made the right tactical decisions. We know that he likes to take a risk in some big European games sometimes, notably when PSG got absolutely destroyed by Newcastle United last season away from home, but ultimately it did feel at half time as well, because I remember saying to somebody in the press box, it really feels like the substitutions will change this game, and ultimately they did. We just didn't sort of imagine that City would take the 2 goals after those changes and then PSG would go on to score the 4 of them. But I do think it is a large element of Luis Enrique setting it up, and also City not really play. I mean, they weren't convincing at all over the 90 minutes. I didn't feel, even going 2-0 up, but I think they surprised themselves by taking that 2-goal lead and didn't know what to do once they found themselves ahead, because I don't think they ever really believed that they were going to be able to build up a lead and hold on to it. And that lack of confidence was it was palpable. You could really notice it. You see City trying to play the ball around in the same way that they used to a couple of years ago when they won the Champions League and they were in their absolute pomp. And those automatic movements just they don't work anymore. Suddenly the balls are going loose. I know the conditions didn't help, obviously, because it was extremely wet, but it did kind of feel like Luis Enrique could sense that City were there for the taking for PSG. And obviously the urgency was ratcheted up once City did, go 1 and then 2 goals ahead in quick fire succession. And ultimately, that expedited PSG's ability, to go and really hurt them where they'd seen weaknesses all throughout the first half and the beginning of the second.
I think that's it. That's what makes it feel like Manchester City are maybe not really contenders anymore. Not just the decline in the Premier League, but we're seeing that manifested in the Champions League. I mean, if we go back over a couple of games, we look at the defeat at Juventus. We look at how they were 3-0 up and completely dominant against Feyenoord, and how they let it slip in the end of the game. We can talk about confidence, and I think that is a huge factor, particularly with the negative run they've been up until recently, when of course they've improved in the Premier League. But I think what really showed is that physical decline last night, and when PSG were able to turn it up in an athletic sense, and that's what we talked about being a positive thing for them going forward and making them maybe contenders in this competition going forward. That's exactly what leaves Manchester City compromised. And I think this PSG were exactly the wrong opponent for them at this particular time.